Welcome back to Hannity, everyone. I'm Tammy Bruce. Now, the new extreme Democratic Party continues to drift further and further left, embracing open borders, higher taxes, and, of course, far-left socialism. None of that does any good for humanity, as we've seen historically. And get this, even Democratic insiders are now admitting that Bernie Sanders has a path to the nomination. From Politico, quote, "Suddenly Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign is being taken seriously. Democratic officials, political operatives, and pundits are reconsidering Sanders' chances." And if that isn't disturbing enough, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez said she'd be quite honored to be his vice president, while admitting she's too young to even hold the office. So tonight, couldn't be more clear. The new extreme Democrats are running the party, driving the narrative, and putting so-called moderates like Joe Biden, if you want to call him a moderate, I guess in this world he appears to be, putting him on the defensive. Because while Biden clings to his frontrunner status, the campaign continues to be plagued by awkward gaffes, a weak record, and his son Hunter's shady dealing overseas. But, of course, the media continues playing defense for him. Let's take a look.
Listen, I don't think Trump is playing chess or checkers. I think he's playing hungry hippos. I get why the president wants a circus, right? A circus is a circus. It's good for him. Everyone gets confused. We end up talking about Hunter Biden. That's not good for the Democrats. And once we start going off to Hunter Biden, what's next? The CrowdStrike guy, Diamond and Silk. You know, like, it's going to be just crazy.
Yeah, so that's in the future tense, crazy. So remember, Joe Biden is literally on tape admitting to a quid pro quo with Ukraine, leveraging U.S. taxpayer aid to get the prosecutor fired that was investigating Burisma Holdings and his zero-experience son, Hunter. And not only that, but a private investigation from a private investigation firm is alleging in a new court filing that Hunter Biden is actually the subject of multiple criminal investigations. But the media would rather just ignore it, and ignore just how disconnected and how dangerous and just how destructive this new Democratic Party has become. Joining me now for a reaction is Trump 2020 campaign secretary Kayleigh McEnany, along with the Washington Times columnist and Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt, and Washington Examiner senior campaign reporter Kerry Picket. Kerry, let me start with you, because this entire environment here, when you're looking at the media covering for the Democrats, the nature of what it is they're covering for, accusing Donald Trump of wanting the circus, he is not in charge of the Democratic Party. He didn't choose these candidates. They're dealing with the mess of what Barack Obama left them in the wake of Obamacare and his 8 years. So Donald Trump is sitting back, trying to run the country. At the same time, are they looking at, obviously, I think any of these individuals can become the nominee, but it is going to require the Democratic machine, effectively, to then anoint one. Clearly, they're still nervous about Biden. Are they serious about Bernie Sanders, do you think?
Look, right now what we're seeing is Bernie Sanders go back into the spotlight. Because remember, Tammy, there was a period of time when Bernie Sanders was #1.
Right.
And the Democratic establishment all of a sudden was kind of freaking out a bit. So they're kind of saying, yo, Joe, you better jump in at some point and kind of save us. But then Joe Biden all of a sudden is having his gaffes, having the entanglements with his son. And now, we began to see Elizabeth Warren have her pop, Buttigieg have his pop, and then all of a sudden they're going back down again. And now we're seeing Bernie Sanders pop up again, and they're beginning to wonder what's going on.
It comes around, Charlie, it almost comes around to who the media is paying attention to, right? Bernie Sanders, after his heart attack, it was kind of kid gloves there. He's not really taken to task by the media at all. Elizabeth Warren was, because of the absurd Medicare for all $52 trillion circus. So she took some hits. But the moment that any attention is paid to them, they sink. Charlie, do you think that this is going to be one of those cases where either they're hoping he will, but now with Elizabeth Warren going away and going down, and somebody who's not mentioned, Charlie, is Bloomberg. Where do you see all of this coming out in the next month or two as we head into the caucuses?
Well, I got to tell you, Tammy, all along I have believed that somebody like Joe Biden, although he has completely marched away from his quote-unquote centrist appearing legacy of Obama sort of platforms, I do think that he most likely represents the broad cross-section of the Democratic Party. But of course, as you point out, he's been running a disastrous campaign. It would not surprise me one bit to see, out of all of this wreckage, to see a Bernie Sanders wind up with the nomination. After all, he won the nomination in 2016. It just so happens that the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign got together and conspired to take it away from him. But it wouldn't surprise me. But I also think that if Bernie Sanders winds up as the nominee for the party, I think he clearly loses, not only because he's crazy and all of his policies are totally unpalatable to general election voters. I think they're even unpalatable probably to a broad cross-section of Democratic voters.
When I was on the left, one of the arguments is that even bringing up the subject moves, and it being accepted as a legitimate thing to discuss, moves it forward. That it's like 5 steps forward, right, 3 steps back. So we can't dismiss that this is an effort perhaps to change the mentality of Americans on the scene. We've seen, though, what they didn't anticipate was Donald Trump reminding them of the greatness of the American ideal and the importance of the republic and certainly capitalism. Kayleigh, at the same time, you've got the other thing, and I've always a little bit seen the Hunter Biden dynamic as a bit of a distraction, but it really, in a way, sits at the core of what the problem is with the swamp, in that it's this nepotism, money, and you wonder, it's like, how do you become a multimillionaire in public service? And now this is the scene that seems to explain that to us, really stripped bare. Do you think that this is, obviously Hunter Biden's problems seem to increase by the day, is this something that will affect Joe Biden if, in fact, he continues to stay at the top of the heap?
It certainly will, because, look, Tammy, when I travel the nation, go to all the president's rallies, one thing I hear repeatedly is about the Washington swamp and this notion that politicians go in, they're enriched, they profit off of their time in public service, and there's no better example of that than Hunter Biden, who had no experience in oil and gas but gets this lucrative contract in Ukraine, gets this lucrative deal over in China, both coincidentally after his father either leads the foreign relations with the country or visits there in the case of China. This sits at the center. And when Hillary Clinton had her email problem and the bleach bidding and all of this came out, CNN, MSNBC, they did their best to cover it, to hide it. I was a contributor at the time. I saw it happen, their attempt to hide these scandals from the American people. But I can tell you this, the American people are smart. They see through it, and they will see this scandal for what it is, just like they did with the Hillary Clinton one.
Kerry, I think one of the things that's different in all of that we're discussing here is social media and is cable television, is the fact that in real time now you can receive the news on a smartphone, that you can get information as it's occurring, that maybe the Hunter Biden thing, if you only had 3 networks to rely on that were covering up, you wouldn't have all the information, be able to make those determinations. And then you've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who seems to be a representation of the problems there when it comes to voting and to literacy economically and historical literacy of who we are. And she's attached herself to Bernie Sanders. Clearly, it's not the Kennedy-Shriver Democratic Party anymore. But do you see that social media is part of what is making this change in how the American people are responding and what they're willing to put up with because we're learning more every day?
Well, certainly. I mean, social media has a lot to do with this, Tammy. But remember, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also provides a lot of energy to this primary for the Democrats that the Democrats themselves in this primary really can't provide. But remember, she's not old enough. And unfortunately, they're going to have to wait maybe until 2024.
Well, if they imagine that this is the future, they've got some bigger problems than we even could imagine, because Americans have rejected that in 2016. They're rejecting it now. And with everything else we've seen, I think they're going to reject it in 2020. So it's a heartbreak. It's an important legacy of the American Republic. But somebody there is going to have to get their act together. Kayleigh, Kerry, Charlie, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I appreciate it.